Charlie, thank you very much indeed. It's a real pleasure to be here, and there are some very experienced people capable of grilling interviewees who are listening in. So you can decide later on how firm or otherwise my grilling of the new BBC Director General is. But Tim, thank you very much indeed for joining us in conversation this afternoon. And I suppose let's start with a broad question, really. What on earth is it like to start a job as Director General of the BBC in a global pandemic? And I suppose perhaps tie it back to report, what has a pandemic given you permission as the BBC to explore in terms of using technology, more remote working, different ways of doing things?
Thanks, Nicky, and thanks to everyone for spending the time this afternoon. As you say, an impressive cast list I saw pop up before my eyes. So I'm conscious there's a lot of experience in the virtual room. Look, I think it's been incredibly demanding period actually for leaders, but in some ways, typically in typical fashion, that I think I hear from a lot of leaders of organisations. This is a period where actually sometimes the best of the organisation shows itself, and you do get permission to move things at speed. I think what is demanding at the moment is we've almost got simultaneously three things going on at the BBC at different speeds, which in the job, which by the way is a very rewarding one, you're managing. The first is obviously COVID, the coverage of COVID. I'm sitting here in W1A where the apps in the newsroom are pinging. We're trying to keep shows on air. We're debating what we do with productions where we're in postcodes where there might be enforced restrictions, where there's worries about variants, etc. So you've got all that to manage. But meanwhile, the kind of next tier up is we've got quite an urgent need to deal with 22 to 27 funding. You know, that's not going to stop. So, and that is a chance for us to tell the story of the BBC, part of the work we're doing today. And thank you for everyone for engaging. But I think beyond that, it's really important that we're just not completely stuck on the treadmill of getting things done in the moment. We need to think longer term about the BBC. What are the ways we're going to reform this place, reorientate it in terms of this whole concept of audience value? And I'm making sure that I think it's a really tough time for everyone, that you carve out enough time to actually do the work in that regard, not just coping. So for me, final point is the pandemic is a mixed blessing for people. I mean, you know, we've all learned enormous amounts. We're capturing the learnings. We're conceiving of things that we would have taken traditionally a couple of years to get through, and we're turning around. You know, look at the education program we provided, very fast turnarounds. We're looking at a couple of other things, by the way, where deadlines are really being shifted, the way people are working is being shifted, all the old cliches, but it does give you permission to get on with it. And I think people envisage, I mean, again, it's all the old cliches. I don't see radical shifts in trends, but I see things happening faster. It's as simple as that. So yeah, we're definitely moving at pace.
Brilliant. No, thank you very much. And I think we certainly agree on the education front. I happened to catch on the programmes earlier on today. Let's dive into the report, which everyone says seen an embargoed copy of. I wanted to start with one of the paragraphs talking about scope-driven savings, and you've talked about funding being one of the issues. And it says, increasingly though, as productivity savings have been delivered and opportunities in this area have become limited, the BBC has been forced to increase scope cuts. What does that mean? Does that mean, I mean, we're talking about cuts to programmes and services. Is that about doing more, or doing less rather, but with more impact? Or are there certain things, certain types of programming that the BBC is just not going to be doing in the future?
It's doing, I mean, I've been very direct about the overall strategy of the BBC is hopefully clear, which is value to audiences. And that obviously means a direct linkage, by the way, which we can talk about to the value to society, creative industries. They're all linked together, but the key revenue model in the UK is dependent on us being kind of ruthlessly focused on value to a household. You know, and I talk very passionately about this. I think in my job, as you travel around the UK when you're allowed, not at the moment, I hasten to add, you know, you look at every household, we are deeply privileged to get £157.50 by law from each one. That is not a God-given right. I've been very clear about that. So you're looking at how you get value. And to your point, one of the things I've said, by the way, even if we had slightly more money, I think we need to ensure we're getting impact, not just judging ourselves on the width of our provision. We need to be doing things that are adding unique value as the BBC and focus our resources. The direct answer on scope, by the way, is we have been, I mean, people always challenge the BBC on does it stop stuff, does it, I mean, it's a classic refrain, with some merits as you manage a public service type budget. But I would say things like, you know, we're no longer in Formula 1. We've had to make tough choices that we are not going to get in the arena on some of these pay sport within the license fee construct. We're going to lose that battle. So it is about, you know, cutting our cloth on that and making some choices. The volume of program making we make in some areas, I mean, you know, the BBC in this period, in terms of its volume of factual program making, which is sensitive because people will say, okay, but you need to do programs in this area and that. But my view is you need to do landmark work. You need, I mean, and there's no scenario in which the BBC, by the way, shouldn't be quite broad. So I'm not talking about a really narrow provision that isn't offering public service and chasing universal value. But I do think in certain areas we can make less. Absolutely. Not every program needs a podcast. Not every program needs lots of web presence. I think we've got to make clearer choices in that, and that will keep going.
So how do you communicate that to staff? I mean, is that going to be seen as, you know, this report today? Is that quite a culture change that you're asking staff in the BBC to make? So to say that actually, great, what you're doing is great, but we don't need a podcast to go along with it. How do you? No,
I mean, I think we've been very direct. You talk to anyone on the BBC, it's a very clear construct, which is audience value. We've said there's 4 things that are going, and it's directly relatable to obviously our purposes. And I keep coming back, they're not butting up. This isn't a pure commercial model. It's about societal value. We should talk about that because in terms of the pandemic, I think it throws into relief the value of trusted news, all the things the compelling case, in my view, around the BBC as an intervention to grow the creative industries. But in terms of the audience value, I've said if we're not trusted, and that is all about impartiality and making sure your voice is heard. The second lever, which is very, very clear, is you've got to get bang for your buck. And it's not good enough in the BBC just to say what I do is a good thing to do. And this is the issue, because I think, and it relates to efficiency, is the commercial organizations I've run, frankly, decision-making is easier because you have the commercial imperative. If something doesn't have a route to profitability, it's not got a future, bluntly. Here it is a more difficult task, as you've got the balances of public value, things that have a contribution publicly, and then in pure value terms, how many people it's reaching. Right? I'm trying to say to everyone that it's not enough just to justify something that it's a good thing to do. Yeah. It also has to be a better use of our resources than alternatives, and you have to be accountable to the impact it has. And that does not mean a highly reductive model where only things that get maximum reach or maximum tweet value or, you know, audience size is not the only variable. But it's not enough just to say, well, that program was sitting over in the corner there. It got a low audience, but it's a very, very worthwhile thing to do. I think I want to land more of the BBC in the middle of the Venn diagram, where you're getting the reach, you're getting the impact, but you're also unmistakably doing the best of public service broadcasting. And we all know what that means, by the way. You can write as much strategy as you like. When you see an Attenborough documentary, or you see a brilliant drama like Normal People, or you see a news program that's really hitting the mark, we know what it all really feels like when you get that right.
So we'll come back and talk about, I think, a really great point about societal value and some of the sort of points that are made about paying the license fee and everything else. But just talk to me exactly about how do you get in that middle of that Venn diagram? Which audiences do you appeal to? How do you measure that? And I'm just conscious of the Ofcom report on the BBC published in November, which talked about and I think the value report talks about this as well, about the minutes of the BBC, how long people interacting with the BBC. So the Ofcom report said that individual interacting content per day, BBC, 2 hours, 22 minutes, down 19 minutes since 2017. And between the 16 to 34s, it was 58 minutes, down 16 minutes since 2017. So, you know, is it about minutes?
Yeah, and Nicky, I think that was TV viewing. Yeah, is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But what it was BBC content across all devices, actually. So I think that's your point about the width of it as well.
Yeah, I mean, overall, by the way, it's interesting in the BBC. I walk. This job is often about walking the tightrope between, and forgive me making some defensive points around the scale of the license fee, but also don't read that for a lack of healthy paranoia around the jeopardy of what the modern market brings once you don't have the benefit of a big share of the fixed distribution. IP opens it up, it threatens the model for all businesses. So I think, we know that, and you'll see it in the 91% of people getting 18 hours a week. We remain remain the biggest media brand for young people 16 to 34 with 80% reach. But there is no doubt we're under pressure on time. Yeah. And I think the challenge here for me is not wholly about driving that number in terms of time spent to an unrealistic level. It's the quality of time spent. Interestingly, when you look at how people value the BBC, the license fee is seen as extremely good value, not wholly through whether you're spending 30 hours a week or 20 hours a week. But if I can get 10, 15 hours, even 5 hours a week, but make sure that is part of your regular repertoire of media and the quality ascribed to those hours is good. And often, interestingly, when you use a couple of platforms like online and radio, we all know what it feels like when someone's connected to the radio output. I pay my license fee for radio. For all these, there's a germ of truth in all these cliches, which is actually that deeper connection. It's not based on wholly just driving at time spent for the sake of it. So for me, that is the message, which is it's about value and ascribed value. It's not just about quantity of time. The BBC is not going to kill Netflix. No, my children are going to love, but we've always existed alongside other players. We've been in a market where Sky have grown successfully. The BBC needs to offer something distinct and special and broad and mainstream, by the way, and we should be chasing a universal audience. That's, by the way, the uniqueness of our challenge. The joy and torture of running the BBC is that we're in the battle for universality. I think it's a winnable battle, by the way. Some don't, I do. And universality is the bedrock of the BBC and where the value really exists. It's that intent to get universal provision out there. And the whole tide rises there across a whole number of fronts, whether it's culturally, economically, for the creative industries. That is a realistic goal, but it's not solely about driving time to a point at which you're thinning out the resources and it becomes insipid. That would be a disaster for us.
So you mentioned other competitions. So I suspect that some of the people listening and some of the questions you might get are going to be, look, actually, there is now the BBC's always had competition, but there is now a more competitive marketplace. And as most of us have spent the last X number of months watching more TV than perhaps we've done for the last 10 years, I think that's become more apparent. So just exploring your universality point, I mean, what are the things and what are the people that you're really aiming for now? And I put a plug in here for BBC Local Radio. BBC Leicester is a fantastic institution and really represents the place and the people that it covers. I mean, that's something Netflix are never going to do. Would you not be better off focusing on that and not competing on, I don't know, big drama, for example?
Well, I think the first thing is, I do think part of my job is to make choices. And the first choice is universality doesn't mean doing everything. Yeah. But it does mean not retrenching into, I think, a single genre or a point where, and that model, by the way, is available for those who are interested in a kind of thinned out public service model, as we all know. And that's not my vision of where we're at. And it's not about one type of person. It is a universal provision. But the critical thing is you're choosing to really focus on areas where you believe you are advantaged. That's kind of almost my commercial, a commercial, any kind of business would say. Now, in that regard, Nicky, I think that you then get to what the differentiating factors of the BBC, this deep local provision and critical for us. we are closer to the audience physically, literally, we understand the audience. Second is UK IP and UK, I mean, we don't talk enough, I think, about the jeopardy to UK IP. You know, no one is happier than I am that we are seeing a lot of production in the UK. We're seeing it as a great place to make movies, make drama. But I also think we need to think about strategically the ownership of IP. What do we actually own? How much content? I mean, that's certainly where other economies of scale, let's put looking east and other places, are focused on. They're looking at, so my view is, to answer your question, you know, we should be in the drama market, absolutely. But we should be choosing those pieces, normal people, all the, you know, some of the more traditional pieces, like I say traditional, but still brilliant pieces, Call the Midwife, but all the way to more edgy pieces like The Serpent. We should be making quality drama. We've always got great storytellers, but we're not necessarily going to compete on price per ep on every front. And some drama, you know, areas of drama, you know, American drama has a slightly different texture to it than UK drama, but we should be in that space. Think about entertainment programming. We shouldn't be doing everything. We should be picking our battles. But I don't subscribe to the view that you should entrench the BBC to what may be loosely called high fiber genres or whatever. I think that would be a disaster for us.
So you mentioned about societal value earlier on, and the value, and I think the report again talks about how at moments, and I think we've seen that in the last year, when there's a big announcement, the Prime Minister's press conference, when he announced the first lockdown, the Queen speaking to the nation, you know, happier events as well, people turn to the BBC. But I mean, there are a number of people, as you know, who say, well, actually, I don't watch the BBC. Why do I have to pay for a license fee? You know, and I think the report also compares the £157.50 against what you might spend on a streaming service. But of course, there you can turn it on and off perhaps every month, or pay for a bit more, pay for a bit less. You know, actually, how do you quantify what you call the societal value of the BBC to end up justifying the £157.50 or more, as presumably there's negotiations about to start with the government?
Indeed. And the construct, I think, for us is, firstly, I do think this bedrock of household value is important. In other words, I think if you wholly make the case on societal value or good for the UK, you're into a different construct. My construct and how I want to run the BBC is for the individual and their household. And the education is a great example because it's right on the purposes. You can see the societal value. I think there are some really interesting and scary numbers around, as we all know, in terms of children without digital access. So that's why we're on BBC Two. So I won't flog that too hard, but everyone knows. But that's a very interesting example where there's a deep correlation between individual value as a parent, almost a utilitarian level. The BBC is delivering. It's delivering for me and my family, and I ascribe value to that. By the way, very different to what any other provider is doing, if I may say so.
Yeah, no, fair point.
So you've got that, but then let's talk about the societal value. Almost comes on top of that. Okay, so I wouldn't get us off the hook, and it always makes. I have a wry smile for people who say the license fee isn't a kind of an accountable model. Come and do my job for a while. It's a pretty raw model, which is, you know, I think if we're not supported by the most households, and when I say supported, the usage numbers are pretty good for us, but we should have healthy paranoia about how many people and how many families are seeing the BBC as necessary or needed. They are different, by the way, to people who feel maybe the BBC isn't getting or right all the time. They still may use a lot of the BBC. So a lot of the emails I get are people unhappy with this, that, and the other. By the way, they're still listening to a lot of radio too, or they're getting value. The societal value, I think, is huge though, and is a case we need to make. One of the issues I've got with people who kind of have deep questions about the license fee is, what problem are you trying to solve? I mean, the creative industries were growing 3 times the speed of the economy going into COVID. They will be a growth sector for us. They've been putting on a rapidly, and you know, we're looking at about 1 million jobs we were looking at in over a 5-year period created. And that's, the BBC is a catalytic kind of player in this. It can do things. Now, there's responsibilities on us. Final thing from a societal point of view, which I think has been so interesting over the last couple of months, is frankly, what kind of debate and what kind of democratic media kind of process do we want to facilitate through our media? And, you know, if we all thought that social media, was a polarized echo chamber and, but didn't leak out into the outside world. I think certain events over the last few months have made it very clear, just the validity of having, and by the way, I get that message from across the political spectrum, quite extreme ends of the political spectrum. They do come together. And I think most people will say, actually having a proper place to debate our issues, to listen to different points of view, is an essential enabler of both the democratic process, but also properly understanding the truth. I mean, it's no coincidence 80% of the UK are okay to take the vaccine. Yeah?
Yeah.
Have a look at the other European numbers. I think the number in the US is 47%.
Yeah. Absolutely. No. Well, I don't envy you your inbox, I have to say. I've been there for a decade, and I'll
it's quite lively. It's quite lively.
We're gonna open up to audience questions in a moment. So I've got one final question. I hope that people have heard Charlie's instructions about the raising of hands. There is, if you go into the participant list, there's a little blue raise hand, and you can stick your hand up, and we will absolutely take your questions. And obviously I can carry on asking Tim questions, but I'm sure there are audience members who have got burning questions as well. But Tim, I just wonder, one of the other things that people say is that obviously there are other income streams open to the BBC. Now, you've come from BBC Studios, and I note in the report that also the pandemic has, of course, had an impact on income for this year. So you might want to say something about that. One of the other things I'm always struck by, though, is that often you're asked to log in to a BBC account. And of course, one of the other things you can do, whether it's iPlayer or other things, is to personalize what it is that you're seeing. So do you think there's an opportunity there for monetizing the data that you hold, doing more to have personalized content, to know more about those who are accessing your services?
Indeed, there's definitely potential. I think I would probably differentiate between international and UK at this point in terms of internationally. I mean, we've built a 1.4 billion in business in studios, good profit margin. I mean, one of the things I'll say, by the way, I mean, it's interesting that we haven't talked so much about the efficiency and the value story here. But one of the things I think, by the way, is it's a pretty, read the story, because I think it is pretty impressive the amount of saving the BBC has made. It's taken a 30% real terms cut, and it's found, ways to really save proper money. And look, our critics, I mean, and also we're our own worst enemy at this. If you have an organization of 19,000 people, you will always find a scenario where you had a couple too many people to do a job or do something. And the BBC is a poster child for that. But where under my tenureship and how we've been, is look at the external benchmarks. So let's not, the push for everyone on the call is I'm happy to deal with specifics, but in the abstract, it's no good saying anymore, they just got too many HR people, or they've got this, or they've got that. What percentage of, it's interesting, Netflix, how many people do Netflix have? Everyone talks as though they've got 50 people and they're running a platform. They've got 9,500. And they're not making anything. We need a body. Now, you can see in the report, and this is kind of new news, you'll see for the first time this year, we're targeting at least 800 people smaller in the public service. These are major reforms. And I think you're going to see us go at this and keep going at it to get really efficient. But there comes a point, a tipping point, at which you do need investment. Now, then we get to the commercial revenue. Sorry, limping to an answer. Very quickly, I think there is definite potential. And in BritBox in the US and other places, we've begun to get sign-in verification, so we can monetize that. There are other areas, I've mentioned audio and other areas, where when I live in the States, I could pipe in Radio 4, thank goodness, for free. Do we still want to do that? Do we want to put a gate on that? There are definite, I don't think it transforms the BBC's finances overnight. And remember, Netflix, got to 15 billion, they're carrying 15 billion of debt. So we will have to be, it is about proper serious business proposals, not just let's launch the iPlayer everywhere and it'll all be fine. But there are ideas we can do internationally. UK, we should be moving in that direction because it gives us all kind of optionality to enable us to personalize. But I do think, we need to pause before we go too far commercializing in the UK. We do a bit with UK TV and others, but you need, the primary game here is to give you exceptional value for your license fee.
Yeah, no, thanks. And the registered accounts, actually, in the report, it says they've gone from 500,000 registered accounts at the start of 2011 to 52.2 million at the start of this year. So I mean, that is
we're flying. We're flying. The issue for us, and it's a battle for talent actually. And we've got some brilliant people in design and engineering, but what is the level of personalization? How do we connect up iPlayer, news? And we've kind of wonderfully gone through all the levers I talked about in value, because frankly, many of thousands of the Netflix people are probably just tuning that algorithm. Yeah. The question is how we do that cost effectively. But if I could really get iPlayer to serve you up what you want in terms of local time length, exploiting news, sounds, if I can bring that together with my teams, I might be able to get another hour of your time every day. Or so and that becomes what's fascinating for us is this blend between editorial curation and AI mechanical, because I do think we're in a nuanced position on that. You want to look at what the BBC newsroom thinks the big news headlines, as well as maybe getting, in my case, the Crystal Palace news. Do you see what I mean? but I wouldn't want a fully personalized news service. No. And I actually find some of the personalization of some of the US services maybe a bit too
much
predictive for me. So I think that's the balance. And the serendipity of Radio 4 is one of its wonders, that you could be talking about St. Cuthbert in our time and then flip over to, you know, a big issue on Women's Hour that's completely unrelated. So we've got to balance that.
Yeah. No, okay, that's very interesting. Now, look, we've got one question already. Now we're going to ask the audience members. You are now being asked to turn your cameras back on, and so we'd like to see you when you're asking your questions. Tim has 3 colleagues who are here with him as well, who maybe Tim might bring into the conversation. We've got Glyn Isherwood, who's the CFO, Claire Sumner, who is the Director of Policy, and Gautam I'm going to mispronounce her name, Rangojan, who's Director of Strategy as well. So I'm going to bring in my former parliamentary colleague, but on a different side of the house, Kevin Brennan, who is going to ask the first question. Kevin, don't forget to unmute.
Hi, Kevin. Good to see you.
Thanks, Nicky. Hello, Tim, and thanks for the report, which I was reading just before we came on the call. And I suppose since we last met, the government has announced that the report on decriminalisation of the licence fee, which Nicky kicked off helpfully a year ago, that they have now kicked that into the long grass, it would appear. So be interested to know what your reaction is to that in terms of the BBC's finances. And just to say that I do agree with you on the IP issue that you made, although when you said UK IP at first, I was a bit worried what you were going to talk about. But I completely agree with you. And of course, in the case of I May Destroy You, Michaela Cole's brilliant drama, of course, she turned down Netflix because they wouldn't let her have any of her own IP, which I think is a very, very significant point. I just wonder what your reaction is, though. We did have a little bit of a discussion last time about the government pre-announcing who they thought they might want for BBC chair. And as you know, things turned in a different direction eventually, and you now have a new chair. How do you react to the latest leaks to the press from Whitehall that the government are planning to choose someone as your regulator who's ideologically hostile to the BBC?
Thank you, Kevin. First, by the way, the IP point and the prominent, I'd list kind of protection of IP and prominence, by the way, which I haven't mentioned in my opening remarks. Big questions for this assembled crowd, you know, in terms of where are we heading in terms of protecting that. And we do trumpet the Michaela Cole example, and I thank you for mentioning it, because it is really important in terms of what the model are, and also the creative partnerships we can have. Obviously on decrim, bravo, logic prevailed. Simple as that. It was a bad idea. It didn't stack up, and I'm very pleased. I think it was a smart decision, and off we go. Yeah, so I haven't got a lot to add on that. I think it was the right decision. On the, I think I may have frustrated before. I can't remember how I responded to on the select committee when I don't get involved in the one thing I can't flip in. One of the many things, but one of the things I definitely can't control is the appointment of a chair of Ofcom. So in some ways, you know, I know what the job, you know, I know to a certain extent what the job is, as you do, Kevin, which is the intrate is huge, by the way, huge in terms of the social media companies. Where do we stop and start? For us, by the way, it's not just about the BBC and public service broadcasting. It's also next generation platforms. What comes after Freeview? what is going to be the interface in modern cars, electric cars, but what's it going to be? Who's going to own those interfaces? What's the level of prominence? These are huge, big strategic issues that will affect the creative industries. As chair of the Creative Industries Council, I feel passionately, how do we unlock growth for the UK post-pandemic? What's the right recovery model? All I would say, Kevin, is I am expecting that Ofcom will have our joys as regulator, but I think there needs to be common ground in terms of how we build the UK creative economy, so that there needs to be a degree of alignment around that. So I'm hoping we can build that with any incoming chair, as we are working constructively with the current CEO. I'm not going to go further than that because I think it would be inappropriate.
Thank you very much. And I think I saw your new chair joining the call as well, so I know Richard's on here. Right, we've got plenty of time for more questions. We've got till 3 o'clock, and I only have one hand at the moment, which I can't believe. So if you can't find the raise hand function, then wave, and hopefully we will see you. I've got Jane Bolland-Carter now. It's fantastic. So I'm John McVeigh, first of all.
Hi, John.
Hi, Tim. Hi, everyone. Hi. Thank you, Baroness Morgan. John McVeigh from PACT. And I was just sort of following on from Nicky's last question to you, which is really about the BBC's commercial revenues, because I think clearly that is part of your future. I welcome your comments about being smarter about where you invest in drama and what's the nature of drama, and maybe stop whinging about Netflix's big global budgets when that's maybe not your job. I think that's really important. It's a Sin's done really well for Channel 4. I can't think of a more British and highly successful series going out right now. But in digging into that, and this is all to do with your previous job at BBC Worldwide/Studios, which is, it's quite hard to tell from this report, what is the most profitable bit? What is the bit that's really driving commercial revenues? I'm glad to see that there is a return, but could that return be bigger? Could it be better? And to your earlier point about being the poster boy of 3 or 4 people doing a job for one, how are you going to drive more commercial efficiency in BBC Studios to improve those margins, to improve the reinvestment, and also where you may have some activity which is loss-making and distorting the market, would you stop doing it?
Okay, there's a lot of questions there to unpack, so thanks, John.
Part of it is about commercial return and commercial efficiency.
Yeah, I've got it. Why don't we go with 2 things, which is John, because you and I have debated these topics a bit, but it's the accountability and the shape of studios and what return looks like. Then I wouldn't mind just touching on where you make money, yeah, because that's interesting in of itself. And I think under my, this is a defensive twitch, but under my tenureship, we've been very clear, which is there are clear, and Ofcom's helped on this. So this is Ofcom set, to be formal about it, what they think are reasonable returns in terms of EBITDA margins. We can talk about that constructed number, which is returns to the BBC, but just in pure EBITDA, what would be a sensible return for this business? Yeah. So delivering 181 million profit. And by the way, there's a number on this call who run big businesses who could opine on this, but 181 million off I think we were 1.388 million revenue, I would argue is not a bad margin for a multi-line business in the way we are constructed. Okay, now longer term, I would love to drive that EBITDA margin up, but it's not just about the EBITDA short term. It's also about making sure we're in the right places and investing for the future, for the long term for the BBC. And I would argue that one of the things I'd look to this group as they assess our commercial performance is not wholly to look at that annual return, annual EBITDA number, but are we in the right place and what is our long-term financial architecture? Because in some ways, we do need to think about where we need to go in terms of if we move to a more D2C model, the shape of that in annual economics may be slightly different. So interesting, I'm kind of arguing myself that I think we've had very clear benchmarks to the outside world and what's a decent return or not. And the second thing is we also need to think going forward that those metrics are the right ones. Yeah. But in terms of where we make money, am I allowed to try to answer, John, which you know, and you know better than anyone, which is we make money where there's big hits. Yeah, this business is driven by hits. It's a spread betting business. Yeah, and the truth is, we can make serious money if that's a third party owned hit that Studios distributes, or wholly owned. And you know, where we make money is on those series that are returners, and there's enough, frankly, for margin for everyone to make money in that return. Traditional channels have done well in terms of margin, as you know, John, where that's holding up, and that's where the pockets of profit are for BBC Studios. Where you see lower margin is in pure making of programs without IP positions. Again, none of this is rocket science. And the other area is in some areas where we would argue that, and we've debated this, and it's interesting, we've opened up through the tendering process, which you've championed only too well, which is there are continuing areas and strands where you just get lower margin, you know, low end. I say low end's not the right way of describing it, but low tariff factual, very low tariff continuing drama, difficult to make serious margins. I don't think we're any different to a lot of the people that are looking around in this call, and I think we've been pretty transparent appropriately, because you can't go to a program level in terms of where that money's coming from. We can do a lot more, by the way. There's plenty to go. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We've got a few people asking questions, so if we can keep questions and answers brief, then we'll get everybody
noted. Yeah.
I'm not auditioning to be the next Fiona Bruce, I promise you. We're going to go to Jane Bonham-Carter next.
Hi, Jane.
Thank you. Hi. I'm afraid I haven't had a chance yet to look at your paper, but thank you very much for what you've just been saying. I think a great supporter, as you know, of the BBC, that the BBC doesn't quite sell itself properly across all the, I mean, you've been doing it with the education offer under COVID, but, you know, I think people don't really understand, except maybe this group out here, about the big give that the license fee involves, which is the, you know, World Service, all those radio programs, channels, sorry, etc. But and I disagree, Nicky, with you. I think big drama, it's really important the BBC keeps doing that. I mean, I know Fleabag wasn't big drama, but, you know, Netflix would not have done that, I don't think. However, question, Bridgerton. Now, that has been a game changer from the point of view of diversity, which I feel very strongly about. And I just really wanted to ask Tim about going forward, because this has been going on for years and years and years, and it really does need to change on screen and off.
Yeah, thank you, Jane, and fully agree with you on big drama, by the way. And now and again, we're going to have a piece like Bridgerton where we look at it and we go, respect is due. Do you know? I mean, I'm honest. We've always done it with ITV. We don't, you know, I just want to be honest about it. But meanwhile, have no doubt that Netflix are looking at us and saying, there's a lot of pieces in terms of what we're delivering and what we're doing that I think we can be incredibly proud of, and Channel 4 and ITV. Actually, there's a lot of good drama. Just in terms very specifically of, and by the way, I don't think it's purely a question of BAME audiences. It's also representation of drama, where how it represents different class. I mean, why do people talk so much about Boys from the Black Stuff, all these titles? Because they're thin on the ground in terms of truly telling the stories of communities beyond the obvious, if I can say it that way, in terms of the creative community. But in terms of specifically, I think you'll have seen the latest Diamond research, which is really, well, you might not have, but they're showing how we're doing in terms of representation. It's really revealing, actually, and it speaks to a big challenge for the industry. There's others, John and I are working at the more creative industries level. So like the BBC, actually, when you look at on-screen diversity in all that means, but ethnic minority diversity as well, the numbers are really impressive in terms of how far we've come in terms of casting. The interesting thing about Bridgerton, I think, is, you know, beginning to look at showrunners from a diverse background, much more, the number that really needs to change. And people will know, hopefully, that I've set these aggressive targets for the BBC of 50, 20, 12, which are very simple. Gender, BAME, and disabled employees working, or crew, or however you put it. The big change for this industry is the wrap shot at the end of shooting, where I'll be very blunt, you see often a more diverse cast, but then when it comes to the people making the programme, and I think the figure we had was 9.9% in terms of BAME working on productions. And that has got to change. Now, interestingly, BBC Studios has just put a very clear guidelines out, and that goes across the BBC as well, which is when you work with the BBC, we expect that 20% of people working on a production to come from groups with protected characteristics. We are on manoeuvres. But I think the truth is we've got to make sure we're highly porous in terms of getting new writers, different showrunners. That will change the DNA of the place as much as some of the recent years where we've made massive progress in terms of casting and on-screen representation. Finally, ring-fence funds. We have 100 million ring-fenced. We are absolutely focused on this agenda, and it's critical.
Tim, thank you. Catherine Johnson.
Yes, thank you. Thanks so much. Thanks, Tim. So you talked quite a lot about BBC services in terms of the distribution services that you own, your channels, your radio stations, even things like BritBox, iPlayer. But increasingly, audiences are, especially younger audiences, are not necessarily going to those spaces, and it's harder to drive them or bring them to the spaces that you own. To what extent, in terms of the future strategy, do you need to think about going to where those audiences are? What are the challenges of doing that? Do we need to rethink the ways in which we evaluate what the BBC is doing or how it is reaching audiences? Should we be including metrics around social media? I mean, the viewing of BBC content on Netflix, because with the audience research I do, there's certainly pockets of audiences that say, well, I don't need the iPlayer, I'll just wait for it to come onto Netflix, because Netflix will get what I'm interested in, and then I'll just watch the BBC content there. So I'm wondering what you think about the extent to which your strategy needs to be focused on bringing audiences to the sites that you own, or to what extent you should be looking to push your content out onto the third-party sites you don't own, and then what the challenges of that are.
It's a great question, and something we're wrestling with. The answer, I think, is that the prize for us is to get people. I'll bring my head out of the sand in a minute, but that you do need to bring people into your services. Yeah, Netflix, Amazon, they're not disaggregating their content everywhere. So the first thing is you need to make sure that, and by the way, you may measure what we do in terms of Netflix penetration and outside. That is really valid. That's valid. But my construct is all around value attributed to BBC by audiences and families, not just by having a sheet of metrics that we have internally. Yeah. And the data is pretty clear. By the way, some people are very quite, pushy on this. They say, why don't you just put your content everywhere, be fine? It wouldn't. And we'll be doing less, there'll be less BBC shows. By the way, that person who's waiting for that show to come to Netflix will get increasingly disappointed, by the way. And the truth is they will come to the BBC because that's what it shows. Now, let me now get my head out the sand a bit and say, how did you, because that doesn't mean you are not engaged heavily with YouTube, with the Facebooks, and we're talking to them, we're talking to these partners. How do we engage with them so there's mutuality of interest in driving traffic back to us? How can we experiment with bits of content on their services? But I do think there has to be a return path. There has to be mutuality here. And at the end of the day, the prize for us is to drive people's loyalty to, these services. And frankly, a drama on BBC One counts for something. It does still. Yeah. A drama on Netflix, Netflix counts. And that's not a mistake. You do not see the US players, by the way. They are moving to increasing vertical integration. And one of the things I worry about is we in the UK, as we pick around at the BBC, we construct a lot of metrics that may be good, if I'm being very blunt, for all of us, but we're losing the audience metrics. So I'm much more focused in my world on output metrics as opposed to just purely input metrics. But we need to be highly active, muscular partnerships with these players, getting volume across to us, but be clear, the prize is on our services and getting that attribution. Otherwise, value begins to dissipate.
I'm going to bring in Michael Grayswood's hand up, but I wasn't sure. Hugh Merriman, did I see you waving your arm? Yeah, okay, so let's have Michael and then we'll have Hugh. Yeah, Michael.
Hi, Michael. Good to see you.
Hi, Tim. Journalism. the elephant on this call. There's no question it's the journalism that gets directors general and chairs into trouble over the history of the BBC. Aside from saying there's always room for improvement, which is the standard answer I used to give, are there specific areas of BBC journalism that you think need some review, reform, improvement?
Of course. Always room for improvement, Michael. No, more seriously, I think it's interesting. I think there's never been bigger demands on the journalistic community in terms of what I'd call the treadmill of news. And you know this, Michael, only too much. The enormity of just constantly coping with multiple outlets. Our editors are being called to fill digital services, blogs. And I very simply think a doubling down on current affairs, more reflective, engaging, kind of long form journalism must have a role here. I mean, I know, Nick Robinson's pieces on political thinking, the long listens. I think, Michael, we've just got to, I think many of us need to really deliberately protect those spaces, grow them. And I think that's something we've got to work on. The other area is just all out current, making sure the organisation has enough capacity for all out current affairs, no holds barred investigations. They may be risky for Director Generals, but they're absolutely something we should be doing. The other area is local and regional reporting must be a focus for us. We've had, I think part of in my tenure, we're trying to get rid of some of that wheel spin between national commissioning in the nations, in television terms versus, and by the way, one of the things that we're talking about more is joining. When the BBC joins up, it feels good, across topic, across subject. So less, and this relates to less kind of atomized storytelling, but across the board. That is something that Charlotte's job across content, but also in news, we're piloting story teams that look more at the issues than being wholly shaped by the individual programme, which is sensitive because we've always had that brilliant culture of the programme editor. But you do need to be able to step back and deliver holistic reporting across the BBC. Local, regional is an area I think we need to keep, fighting for. And then I haven't even started on international. I think there's big global debates, trends that we could do a better job. We can keep doing. We do an exceptional job. So, but we can keep focusing on. So lots to do. And by the way, we haven't even talked about new talent coming through and new voices that connect. And personality. It's always been about personality, this game as well. Even news. It's always been about personality. You know this, who's the interviewer, who's the person bringing. We've just got to keep refreshing. Lots to do.
Right, we've got lots to do. We've got 6 minutes because we've got busy DG and busy audience, I'm sure. So I've got 2 more questioners. If we keep questions and answers brief, we will absolutely get through them. I'm going to bring in Hugh Merriman and then finally Steve Barnett. Hugh.
Great. Hi.
Thanks, Nicky. Hi, Tim. You've touched on some of this, Tim, but I wanted to ask you if you're optimistic that perhaps following some personnel changes inside Number 10 and also the prominent role the BBC has been seen to be playing as a public broadcaster through the pandemic, that you've reset the dial when it comes to government relations.
Yeah, I think we've got a very, very clear case around what this organisation brings to the UK and why it's worth investing in. And I do think that case is as clear as it's ever been. If I'm honest, I'm slightly less obsessed with one person here or one person there. I absolutely think that the recent months have put in sharp relief some of the key societal as well as household benefits of having a strong BBC. What I think is critical though is we remain focused on how we can serve both the households but also the nation going forward, or the nations going forward, as we look to pandemic recovery. I think we've got a real role to play. And hopefully if people read the report, they will see that there is genuine hard work there's really, really serious work in terms of $1 billion of savings, hundreds of people leaving the BBC. We have loads of work to do, but I think people are beginning to get that. And there is a point, which is the hyperinflation in this market. You cannot have the BBC on the cheap forever. You can put people with operating experience like myself, you can really grind out the costs. But I do think that message is landing pretty broadly, Hugh, in terms of why this is a sensible investment. We've got work to do, though. We've got work to do, but it is. I think it's. We're in a. I am optimistic because I believe that the truth is good, as it were.
Right. Final question from Steve Barnett.
Hi, Steve.
Hi. Hi. Thanks, Nicky. The government set up a panel on the future of public service broadcasting. And it might be a question for Michael as much as for you, Tim.
Yeah.
What do you think it's there for? Or what have you been told? And more importantly, what one recommendation would you like to see coming out of it that would help the BBC?
The first part is definitely one for the DCMS and the actually I can see at least two of the members here. So I really am the wrong person to ask in terms of exact scope. But let me be a bit warmer in terms of I do think the huge question. What I've been talking about today is that we can't let this drift. If we care about the UK media market and the creative industries, there are big calls to be made, and I've already touched on them, Steve. Prominence. What are we going to do in terms of? We've had a situation where there is no doubt that platforms like Freeview and EPG slots have allowed us to grow successfully the creative industries, where, and this is the critical point, I think gets missed all the time, where the commercial side of the creative industries has had a brilliant few years as well. Yeah, it's not as if we haven't had a situation in which we have, I mean, everyone's at it now, which is how do you blend public and, free market, for want of a better expression, interventions, or public interventions, free market business to create growth. We have had a brilliant run on that. My view is that if we really care about public service broadcasting, there are some big choices around prominence, next generation platforms, and the overall market in which we're at. And where do we see scale stopping and starting? I will leave the panel to have fun with that. My job is to fix the BBC and to benefit from the help, without doubt, they'll be giving PSB. So that's good.
Tim, thank you very much indeed. I'm afraid we are out of time. We did promise we would finish no later than 3 o'clock. But the question you haven't been asked, and I don't know whether this is going to be in your inbox too, is whether we're going to see Jonathan Van Tam on Strictly Come Dancing come the autumn. So I don't know whether that's on discussion for the
I've got to speak to his agent. I'm sure there must be one now. You don't deliver that well in front of a screen without getting an agent. So I'm sure I can think of a few suspects who are probably giving him a call once he's finished his core business. Yeah.
So we'll leave that one with you. I want to thank everybody for attending this afternoon. Charlie, I don't think there's anything else that we need to say formally apart from thanks. Is there? There's no follow-up note. And I want to thank Tim and his BBC colleagues as well for being here. Thank you for the excellent questions. And as ever, I think it's what this has shown is the BBC continues to be debated as one of our great institutions. People absolutely care about it, even if they don't agree with it. They do listen and watch it. And of course, it's your 100th anniversary coming up next year, isn't it? So
indeed,
we'll watch to see what's going to happen there. But thank you very much. I think that is it, and we can all log off now. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.